We're seeing more and more headlines of China's long arm inside the U.S., from fentanyl pouring across our borders to secret Chinese police stations on U.S. soil to efforts to silence freedom of speech in our universities. While awareness of the Chinese regime's insidious nature grows around the world, one group has been peacefully standing up to the Chinese regime's atrocities for decades. It's been over a quarter century since the Chinese regime launched a nationwide persecution campaign to wipe out a spiritual group called Falun Gong. Their crime, following the tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Today, that persecution is still happening. The Chinese regime has even expanded its efforts to surveil and influence events outside its own borders, even here on American soil. Join us as we uncover why a brutal clampdown that started 26 years ago inside China is now spilling over into America. I'm Tiffany Meyer, and this is a China in Focus special, China's Long Arm. Welcome to a special edition of China in Focus. As you can see with us here are some special guests, four practitioners of Falun Gong. They each have their own unique and compelling story to share. They've witnessed firsthand the Chinese regime's transnational repression. But before we get to their stories, let's set the stage. Today, we're delving into the Chinese regime's long arm. Whether that's infiltrating our schools, silencing dissidents, or shaping public opinion, the Chinese regime has cast its shadow over more and more of our freedoms. To the Chinese regime, nothing is off the table. There's no better example of this than the regime's brutal campaign to eradicate the spiritual discipline Falun Gong. 26 years ago, the Chinese Communist Party launched a nationwide campaign using jail, torture, even crimes against humanity to try and wipe out this faith. That repression hasn't stayed inside China, but has even spread here on American soil. And today with us here, we have a special group of guests to share their story so that we can learn from them and figure out what to do as we see that seeping into America. I want to go back a little bit first, though, and go to you, Zenon, because you were part of a historic moment that unfolded inside China on Tiananmen. We actually have some images from that I want to bring up. So here's you, actually. Talk to us. What happened here?
This was in 2001. So this was a long time ago. This is a lot of people understand this terminology, CCP, today, and we learn a lot of the evils of the Chinese Communist Party. Back in 2001, the international community is trying to welcome China as a type of trading partner. And so it was very hard for us to speak out on behalf of the people being tortured and killed in China. And I felt deeply compelled to do so. The practice of Falun Gong is absolutely free. And I got a lot of health benefits from it. My mother started practicing it. She got a lot of health benefits from it. And to know that people inside China were not only stopped, but the rest of the citizenry is lied to and being told something that can benefit their health and life for free is something that's nefarious or is harming society, a blatant lie. I felt compelled to help speak out for the people in China, not just for the Falun Gong practitioners, but for the people inside China who were being lied to. We kind of joked a little bit, we quibbed about what it would be like to see a policeman's face if we were standing inside China on Tiananmen Square looking at him with our white faces. And we just started to look into it and investigate the possibility if we could even get visas. And sure enough, we did.
I mean, I want to definitely get into that because I think that's a very fascinating story, a very compelling story. As we can see, you were actually being carried right there by Chinese policemen. But I want to bring it back to the United States for a little bit first, because a couple years after that, you were in Flushing in New York, and you were also attacked by Chinese agents on U.S. soil. Talk to us about that.
One of our efforts to educate Chinese people is to be at tourist sites so that when they leave China, they're actually able to interact with people who are allowed to get free information. And so whether it be tourist sites or Chinatowns, we'll have various places where, you know, people can run into us, get flyers, ask us questions, and talk to us about this. And in Flushing, New York, we had a booth where we were, you know, providing literature for people. And we were being targeted by like mobs of people. It escalated to a physical confrontation where I was, you know, trying to put my body in the way of people, protect some people, and getting hit myself. All I see is a bunch of people, but you can tell you can tell when somebody's using effort, right? So you can see somebody trying to get angry, trying to get other people angry, and you can see other people just kind of standing around watching. And so later we found out that the Consul General in New York admitted in a telephone call, it was recorded and then printed, I believe, by your sister company, Epoch Times, the entire transcript of the call, where he even bragged about paying agents to go to that incident to help create the conflict here in New York.
I mean, as you mentioned, you know, it's incredible that you can have something like that happening on American soil. Everyone looks at America's land of the free.
Totally shocked.
Freedom of belief, freedom
Totally
of religion,
shocked.
all of these things. And to have that effort suppressed is just incredible. Ben, I know you're a spokesperson with the Falun Dafa Information Center. There's a lot of reports coming out. You had a recent one on transnational repression, something like we just heard Zenon talk about there. First, kind of lay the groundwork here. What exactly is Falun Gong, and why does what's happening to the Falun Gong community impact Americans here?
Yeah, big issue to unpack. So maybe we can define a little bit terms just for your audience. So what is Falun Gong? Falun Gong is a spiritual practice made up of Buddhist school, Buddhist principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. So those are things practitioners seek to kind of do and as like a spiritual perfection, so in their lives. And then it involves about 5 sets of exercises. You can see them in the back here, standing and sitting exercises, like a gentle qigong. And it was introduced to the public in 92, and from 92 to 99, organically in China, grew from 0 to 100 million people. So 1 out of every 13 people. The size of that, and for various reasons we'll get into in this discussion, scared the Chinese Communist Party, particularly the leader at the time, Jiang Zemin, started this brutal persecution that we're talking about today. But the long arm of the Chinese Communist Party has never ended at China's shores. The reason for that is their stated goal is to export their totalitarian. So when we talk about the term transnational repression, what that means is that a government, a totalitarian government like China, is reaching beyond its borders to control its diaspora, like meaning its Chinese nationals or people here, as well as the American public. And there's been a lot of evidence lately from 2022 especially, all the way from high-level meetings with Xi Jinping himself to the various security apparatuses that indicate that this is a coordinated plan by China to the top to try to silence freedom of speech and freedom of belief in the United States.
I want to delve a bit into just how wide-ranging that is and just how incredible it is, because in 2022, we got this leaked directive from actually inside the highest reaches of the Chinese Communist Party that revealed just how expansive that effort to suppress Falun Gong is, even overseas in America. You know, these insider accounts revealed that it came directly from Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping. He was expressing frustration with his own officials about their inability to suppress this practice. He even said, you know, they had to go after and neutralize Falun Gong's overseas activities, as you're laying out, right, what's happening here in America, instructing officials to ramp up efforts to, quote, completely and on an international scale suppress Falun Gong's momentum. And that was through 2 main ways: influencing global public opinion and leveraging legal warfare. So, Emily, I know you were part of the Students for Falun Gong effort. So I want to get into how we're seeing some of this directive play out on college campuses, actually. So in terms of the Chinese regime's long arm, we're seeing instances of that in some of our highest, most famous institutions of higher education. I actually want to play you a clip before I let you respond from Harvard, where the Chinese ambassador was speaking, and then a Taiwanese Harvard student tried to raise some concerns, and then something happened. So let's play that clip and then have you all react.
Come to paint the illusion of a prosperous China, but your hands are painted with blood. You've robbed the Hong Kongers of their most fundamental freedoms and devastated their democracy. Now, in my country, Taiwan, you sought to do the same.
So there you see that Taiwanese Harvard student getting dragged out quite roughly by a Chinese student. Emily, first, what was your reaction to that clip? And have you or someone you know experienced something similar while in our universities?
So it's shocking to see footage like that and something like that happen on university soil in the United States. But to me, it's actually not that surprising. And the only reason I say that is because I've been practicing Falun Gong for a long time. And like you said, in recent years, I've worked very closely with students for Falun Gong. So we're a grassroots and nonprofit organization, and our goal is really to support Falun Gong related activities, club activities on university campuses, mainly in North America because that's where we're based, but also internationally. And I think this work is quite important, in my opinion, just because of like the clip that we saw. Really, any dissident group on any university campus in the United States, unfortunately, is subject to similar harassment, discrimination, you know, whether it's Falun Gong, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, Taiwanese, Chinese democracy groups, anyone that dares to speak out about what the CCP is doing is really subject to similar harassment. And there were a lot of stories, and just some that I can think of off the top of my head. Chinese students unfurling a 20-foot-long banner, the Chinese flag, in front of a booth at a student activities fair, a Falun Gong booth, refusing to leave until police had to escort them away. A Chinese professor, unbeknownst to the club, the Falun Gong Club, had gone to the student activities department and spread misinformation, said the Falun Gong Club is doing this and that, you should not let them have their activities on campus. So unbeknownst to the club, that had happened, and they found that it was exponentially more difficult to get their activities approved. They couldn't reserve rooms on campus, and later they found out that that's what was happening. And then my own, which was also, you know, months and months of backlash from Chinese students just for holding a movie screening about Confucius Institute. So I think, yes, we're seeing this increasingly.
Given, you know, what we're seeing here on American soil, before we continue, but I think we need to rewind the clock a bit and see what was really happening inside China to the point that it would even spread over to America. So let's go all the way back to, you mentioned the practice began in 1992. Grew in popularity to the point that there was about 100 million inside China alone practicing. That number is bigger than members of the Chinese Communist Party. So then chairman, leader Jiang Zemin decided this was a threat and launched this nationwide persecution campaign. I do think, though, you know, nowhere in terms of Falun Gong have they ever mentioned they're political, they wanted to do anything to overthrow the government. So this was straight from the Chinese regime deeming this a so-called political threat. But we saw a massive persecution campaign, something I don't think you've seen the scale of since. And from what I've seen, various history books, all of these different things, normally if the Chinese regime tries to stamp something out, within 3 days it's gone. But you don't see that with Falun Gong. So I want to go to what that environment was like inside China. Minghui, I know you grew up inside China. You had maybe a different life than some of the other Chinese people because your parents actually practiced Falun Gong. Bring us back to that setting. You were very young. What was that environment like having practitioner parents?
Yeah, I actually, from age 1 to 5, I couldn't stay with my parents. I was with my grandparents because my parents, they were either imprisoned or they couldn't go back to their home because the police were tracing them down, knowing that they were practitioners of Falun Gong. So at age 5, actually, it's my first clear memory of seeing my mother. And that was when they picked me up from my grandparents. It's from another city. So now I'm in Guangzhou. And my mother was inside this brainwashing center. They brought me there, and I just remember seeing her being tied up to a chair, and there was this like really thick plastic tube inserted into her nose, and she was being force-fed at that point, and I could tell she was in a lot of pain. So I was crying, and then she looks like she was in a lot of pain, and it didn't seem like the feeding was there to like save her life. It was to torture her. And actually, many years later, when when she was recounting that memory, at that point she had already been on a hunger strike for many days. And so that force feeding had also been happening here and there. So she was going through that excruciating pain pretty frequently. But then on top of that, they wanted to bring her 5-year-old daughter in, me. She wanted to bring me in to witness that, to let her see that, hey, your daughter hasn't seen you in years, but now she's seeing you. She is seeing you in pain because you still practice Falun Gong, and she doesn't dare to approach you, and she's crying. And I know that's what really broke her, because like at that point she's been through a lot of physical pain already, but on top of that, she wanted the brainwashing camp really used me to really break her will. Yeah. And actually I stayed with her for a few days in that center, and by the end of it, I was grabbing her hand, and it's just like, Mom, let's go home. And they wouldn't let her. So that's my very first memory, very first clear memory with my mom. And ever since then, I've been living with my parents in Guangzhou, and I've always been living in fear. Actually, a few years later, my dad was arrested to the labor camp because he was telling his colleague about the truth of Falun Gong, that we are just people that follow truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, and we do these gentle exercises to improve our spiritual health, to improve our physical health. And he got reported by his colleague for just saying stuff good about Falun Gong. So while he was in the labor camp, my mom often had to work 2 jobs, at one point 3 jobs, to just make ends meet. And sometimes I would be, sitting by the elementary school gate, and I was sitting with the security guard because there's a room like by the gate. I was sitting with them, and I see all the kids being picked up by their parents, and I was just always sitting there waiting for my mom, and then I would be crying. Sorry, I didn't expect to be this emotional this early on. I would be sitting there crying, and then some teacher on duty would come to comfort me and say, hey, I'm sure your mom didn't abandon you, it's fine. Like, your parents still want you. They thought it was because I was afraid of my parents' abandonment, but it was because at that point my dad was already in the labor camp. I didn't know what would happen to him. I think one thing people have to understand is how severe the persecution is. It's like every day you hear about like practitioners being tortured, and they're being denied treatment inside, medical treatment inside, they're being persecuted to death, and like at some instances even have their organs taken away while they're alive. And it's like there are so many things that could happen. So it's like every day I'll be worrying about my dad already, and then when my mom comes to pick me up late, that's also my fear, that something could happen to her. So yeah, I was just living in fear every day pretty much. And if a police car drives by, are they coming for my parents? Are they, yeah.
Thanks, Minghui, for sharing your story. I got to pull it together myself. It was incredibly moving. I think, unfortunately, Minghui's story is the story of millions of families inside China. When we talk about the scale of the persecution, Falun Gong was very different because it was the fastest spiritual movement in Asian history, one of the fastest growing spiritual movements. The scale is something I think people don't quite understand. Like when we say 100 million people, 1 out of every 13 Chinese people, to Minghui's point, she was a kid, so her two parents were part of the 100 million, but then it's her, and it's aunts and uncles. So it's really the whole fabric of Chinese society. Unlike Uyghurs or Tibetans, it's not regionalized. It was all across China. And 100 million is a really big number. Like if you take, just for scale so people can understand, if you take Tibet, Hong Kong, and the Uyghurs, you put them together, you'd have to multiply them by 3 to get close to the amount of people that were practicing at that time. And so the scale is huge. And I think the brutality as well is something really hard for Americans. Minghui told is an example of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of documented torture cases, thousands and thousands of deaths that we know about, but the true numbers is probably much higher. And the reason the Chinese Communist Party does that, you know, Minghui mentioned brainwashing centers and labor camps, right? So these are, you know, places that mirror concentration camps in a lot of ways. And they were places that they would send Falun Gong practitioners because you have to understand that the Chinese Communist Party wants to control every part of the populace, not just how you move, not just what you say, but really your very soul. So when we talk about, hey, it's coming to America and there's this repression that's coming to America, of course they haven't changed their nature. You know, the Chinese Communist Party is much like the parable of the scorpion and the frog, where you have the scorpion riding the frog's back, and then at the end it stings the frog, and the frog says, why did you sting me? Because I'm a scorpion. The Chinese Communist Party is that scorpion. So we should not expect it to act in any other way than poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Zenon, on that note of what we're hearing, seeing unfold here in the US, but also especially inside China, just the sheer terror, like every time Minghui heard the police siren, she didn't know if that meant her parents, she would never see her parents again. Just that level of fear. I want to go back to your earlier story of when you went to Tiananmen, you and a bunch of other Westerners. Walk us through that process. You mentioned a little bit about why you decided to go there, but weren't there risks? Did you know if you were going to be able to leave?
Sure. Well, when the persecution of Falun Gong first started, I was in no way, shape, or form, not only not politically active, not politically aware. I was a very young man. I didn't understand the ways of the world or how anything worked. And it was, unfortunately, I learned about the world through the persecution and advocating for people in China and interacting with media and government officials and learning about that. I felt that if as a people we couldn't defend truth, compassion, and forbearance, where do we go from there? If each one of us is truly improving ourselves from the inside, and that people were being lied to about something so good, it just shook me to the deepest core of my being. I'm reading about these stories of Minghui's parents and many others coming out of China, and they're being faced with this question, and aren't I being faced with the same question? And so it's very challenging to make a decision to venture into a totalitarian regime on principle. And I was scared, but I couldn't get away from the answers that were coming up inside me when I was asking myself these bigger questions. After wrestling with these decisions, I did make the decision to go. But then entering the airport in Toronto to catch the flight, that reality started to visit me a lot more, and I was very unsettled all the way up into the day before going. I was terrified, and I'm more terrified when you land in China and you're walking through the airport and there's these signs: if you possess a firearm, you death penalty. If you possess drugs, death penalty. And it's in English. They're telling me, and there's nothing stopping them from putting that in my suitcase, right? You know, worse fabrications have happened that, you know, we've all seen over the past years. And so it was hard, but luckily I was able to meet up with my friend who I had decided to go with, and he helped to keep my feet on the ground.
I want to expand on that because I think we actually have a clip from when you were there, and I guess your friend was the one recording. I was wondering how we got this footage. Let's play that clip, and then you can tell us about that moment.
Sure.
So that was your friend recording?
Yes. Yes.
And I think there was a tiny little, we can hear you, that's you in the clip shouting in Chinese, and then you're getting pushed towards those security vans. Bring us back to that moment. What was it like in Tiananmen? The Chinese police were closing in, you know.
Well, there was one part that you guys didn't show that I particularly deeply appreciate is when I actually ran out of the vans. Because in order to do that, when I broke out the vans, there was a policeman standing right there. And I had to fake left and go right and totally undress the guy. I'm running as fast as I can, and I was very athletic. I played hockey, and so they weren't catching me. But I couldn't open that banner there. It was in my pant, like I had pulled it out. But as I was running too fast and it was flopping. And so I said, well, you came here, you know, to do this. So I stopped running, opened the banner and shouted. And the second I stopped running, I started shouting, and then my face was rushing to the ground because they had just swung and I was very lucky that I caught my face because it would have smashed into the pavement. They were on me very, very quick. But hollering out like that, I'm screaming as loud as I can, and I almost sound a little bit angry, but inside my heart, I feel like a child. I feel like I just got the greatest toy in the world, and it's Christmas, and I'm so happy because I see all the Chinese people's faces, and they're hearing and seeing a white person saying Falun Dafa is good. And for them to see that in other countries, I'm wearing the flag of another country, we all are, that this is around the world, that they're being lied to, that for a moment they had to stop and say, wait a second, the Communist Party has lied to us in the past. Are they doing it again? And to be able to know that I was able to shout that to them and see their faces, I just had this unbelievable joy. It's like these days, weeks, and months of like pressure and fear, it just kind of blew open, and yeah, I'll never forget it.
I want to get to the incident you're talking about because I think that's very important. But really quickly, Minghui, because you were inside China, that environment, that suppression, the fear that you were talking about, I'll just let you react to Zenon's story. You know, now that you're in America, reflecting on that, what do you make of, you know, this group of Westerners going into Tiananmen and pulling something like that off?
Yeah, I've seen your images as a child. I've seen the huge banner that the other Westerners were holding together. I've seen that all as a child inside China. It was very touching to me. I don't know if you could tell, but I was tearing up to your story, and I think even though I was inside China, going through the persecution because my parents were going through the persecution, I never were put to this place where I have to make a clear decision that potentially risks my life. And I think like Zenon and like my parents and so many other Falun Gong practitioners inside China, they were constantly making that decision to make sure that truth is told, and that something that benefited them so much shouldn't be slandered like that, and that people who are being lied to can potentially turn into perpetrators too. Like, just say if some innocent Chinese people, they don't know about Falun Gong and they hear about the government saying all these lies about Falun Gong, that these are evil people, and next time they see some other Falun Gong practitioners trying to tell other people, clarify the truth to other people, and this person, because they believe the CCP propaganda, they report on this Falun Gong practitioner, they turn them in to the police.
That's the exact point, though. What Minghui just said is, how do you get the Chinese populace to turn against something? You know, we often look at the 30s in Germany and we think, how could a whole populace have turned against it? And yet in modern day, this has happened in China to a degree. But even in the United States, right, that playbook that Xi Jinping talked about of propaganda and media disinformation, what is the point of media disinformation? The point of media disinformation, or polluting the populace with these lies, and they might not be the same lies in China, but again, they will rhyme. They will rhyme. Falun Gong is a strange group of people that are secretive. Maybe they're a cult, right? A word that Jiang Zemin came up with. If people don't know Falun Gong in the West, they don't know, oh, are they a secretive small group? Well, no, they're 100 million. And no, it's not secretive. You can go online and read all the teachings, and we're all normal in jobs, and right, we have families, but people don't know that. They're meditating, that seems good. Oh no, but I heard this weird thing over there. That is the playbook that is so effective to get people to not stand up against the CCP. And that is the exact same playbook that they're trying to run in the West. So it's not just happening 20 years ago or 26 years ago, it's happening now.
On that note, Emily, I want to bring you into this conversation, shifting gears a little bit, because you learned of the Fa overseas, Falun Dafa, Falun Gong. Talk to us about what that was like. Very different environment from Minghui, but what was that like for you?
Right, so, excuse me, I first learned about Falun Gong when I was, I think, around 9 or 10, so my dad was the first in our family to practice. Both my parents were actually physician scientists in mainland China, but they left in the early 90s. They gave that up because they wanted to live in a free society, and they wanted a better future for them, and then also for me and my younger brother. We were both born here in the United States. And I think at the time, all my dad was really looking for was stress relief. I think he had heard that the exercises and the meditation, good for stress relief, that mental clarity. He needed a boost of energy. They both were finding new jobs, raising 2 young kids. My dad was also doing a master's program at night. So I think he really needed something for stress relief. But what kept him going and sort of convinced him that this was not just physical exercise as a way for health and fitness was the moral component. Because like Ben said, it's 2 things. It's not just the physical, but it's the mental, it's the spiritual, following truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance in your everyday life. How do you be a better person every single day? And I think both me and my dad were pretty quick-tempered and hot-headed. And I remember my mom specifically, she said, after he started practicing, they used to argue a lot because things were kind of stressful, but she would try to pick arguments with him, pick fights, and then he would just sort of smile and be like, we're not going to argue right now. I'm going to go do the exercises. We can talk later when we're both a little more calm. And I think that really convinced her, something so good that could change a person so dramatically. I've definitely had a journey with Falun Gong because, I knew it to be something so beautiful and good that changed my family, changed me, and gave me something to guide my life. But then on the other hand, I knew of the persecution. Family members calling from China saying, maybe you should stop practicing. And I think that's really traumatizing as a child. But then I matured in my faith, but also in my life. And I also met so many Falun Gong practitioners who had escaped persecution in China. And not only were they so grateful to be in the United States and to be able to speak up, but they had no resentment for the torture and the persecution that they faced. And I think that really was a turning point for me, to see these people who faced persecution still have that boundless compassion, not have any resentment towards the perpetrators of these crimes. I think that really inspired me to do what I do and to be more active in human rights.
Recently, there were some bills passed to protect Falun Gong. One is called the Falun Gong Protection Act. Another is on stopping forced organ harvesting. Just on how horrific that is, though, I actually want to play a soundbite or a clip from Congressman Scott Perry, who's talking about the horrors of that to kind of set the stage here so we can learn a bit more about just how horrific this is.
Forced organ harvesting, a form of mass murder. This is something out of 30s and Joseph Mengele, but it's happening today. On March 1st of 2020, the Independent Tribunal into Forced Organ Harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China found there to be an incomprehensible gap between the number of transplant operations carried out in the PRC in comparison to the number of eligible registered donors. What does that mean? That means in China, if you've got the money, there is no waiting list for you to get an organ. Go anywhere else in the civilized world and find that. What would that mean? Well, that means there's a ready, Mr. Speaker, there's a ready supply of these organs, because there is. Now, their report concluded that forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale, and that Falun Gong practitioners have been and probably are the main source of organs for forced organ harvesting.
And Ben, on that note, of course, in the headlines a lot you hear more and more about what's happening to the Uyghurs. Totally horrific how that's becoming a huge supply for these organs. But there doesn't seem to be that much focus on the Falun Gong community. But as Congressman Scott Perry was pointing out, they've been the main source.
How we found out about this, we would have people coming out of labor camps, people like Minghui's dad, and they would escape to the U.S. and you'd hear, they didn't know, but they'd be telling these stories like on the one hand they're getting tortured, on the other hand they're getting these medical exams where they're checking your cornea, where they're checking your, and it's like, wait, those things don't add up. And it started to become apparent because what happened is China has no organ transplant system at all. There's donors it's not like a thing. And later the Chinese Communist Party would claim, oh, it's from death row inmates, and the numbers aren't even close, as Scott Perry said. To give you an example, from 1999, when millions of Falun Gong practitioners started being rounded up in this persecution, to 2000, the number of liver transplants 10x'd. What we're talking about when we're talking about forced organ harvesting is we're talking about a state, in this case the Chinese Communist Party, building military hospitals, which they did build the infrastructure for after the persecution of Falun Gong, taking people often while they are still alive, and then killing them, and then taking their organs from their body and selling those for a profit.
Hard to believe, just absolutely horrific what's happening. For those who are watching and want to learn more, where can they go to find more information?
Yeah, so we have a website, Falun Dafa Information Center. We've kind of been a nonprofit that's worked with the government and has a number of reports. So our website is faluninfo, faluninfo.net, and people can go there. You can find out information about forced organ harvesting, the persecution, the practice.
And Emily, with the work you've done with students for Falun Gong, for those watching, maybe a student themselves, they don't know how they can speak up on college campuses. What would be your message to them?
I would say don't be afraid. There is support out there, and definitely, being in the United States, we have the privilege and the right to speak up. So I definitely want to encourage anyone, definitely reach out to us as well. We're here to support you. Contact at studentsforfg.org. But I also just want to encourage, non-practitioners of Falun Gong, strike up a conversation with someone who practices Falun Gong.
And Zenon, you had your own journey. You went to China, experienced a little bit of what Minghui was describing, that type of environment. What's the main point you would like our viewers to leave today's show with?
I'm a health and fitness coach. I continually have to guide people through a lot of health and fitness challenges through their life every single day. We don't proselytize in Falun Gong. It's not part of our teachings to convince people to practice Falun Gong. I don't do that with my clients either. But my own personal experience practicing it and raising children and just having the regular challenges of life to have something which is empowering my mind, my body and soul simultaneously, harmonizing them together, giving me that strength to face the challenges of the day is extraordinarily rewarding. And for me, existentially, still after 20 years, I still think about this larger for civilization. Yes, it is good if we can protect a practice that promotes virtues in society. So yeah, that's my message.
I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us. Incredible and important stories you all shared. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. As we just heard, stories of heartbreak, of resilience, and hope. As global tensions and endless headlines fill the airwaves, let's take a step back and reflect. As these stories demonstrated, each individual can take a stand in the face of repression. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of China in Focus on NTD. I'm Tiffany Meyer.